Treasurer Mike Frerichs, what is your response to the governor's budget address?
Well, I heard an awful lot of increases in spending, but I didn't hear a way to balance the budget. The governor should be taking the lead on presenting a balanced budget. What I heard him say is we're going to punt to the Senate and let them take the lead in passing a balanced budget. If he's not willing to do his job, then I think someone else needs to step up.
Let me ask just two follow-up questions. One, what are your thoughts on the so-called grand bargain that's been taking place in the Senate?
I think they have been working for a while on a grand compromise. I think there have been efforts from other people to undermine that, and I'm not sure his changes entered a month or two after the process started are necessarily going to help move the ball forward.
State Representative, what is your thoughts on the governor's budget address?
Well, I thought building on his message 3 weeks ago in the State of the State address, he wanted to build on the positive things that we can do to move the state forward. A lot of it highlighting the work the Senate's been doing the last 2 months, really trying to bring the two parties together into what he calls a grand bargain, a compromise that has all the elements of revenue, reform, spending cuts, a package that really fixes and takes the state in a new direction that it needs to move in. But I think more importantly, what he brought out was the fact that fundamentally underpinning all of the problems of the state is the fact that we are losing jobs, and with that we are losing people. We've lost population for 3 years running, and if you count removing foreign immigration and births, we've been losing for pretty much this whole decade. And if you are not growing the population and growing jobs, there's no amount of spending changes that are going to have a long-term fix.
You mentioned the grand bargain, so-called grand bargain that took place between Republican leader Radonio and the Senate President Cullerton. There's some members of the Republican caucus in the House that have publicly criticized that. What are your thoughts on that grand bargain?
Well, I think right now it's a process. It's a process where the sides are having a negotiation. And anyone who's been involved in bargaining between sides, there are going to be lots of ideas that are thrown out, and some of them are going to be just for talking, and they're going to move off the table. I don't want to prejudge that bargain as it's moving forward, because I want to see what they're able to reach when they come to an agreement, hopefully pass out of the Senate, and then send over to the House.
Representative Fred Crust, thanks for joining us on the 09 channel. So we just heard the governor's budget address. What are your thoughts?
Well, words are always nice, Terry, and he said some things I think many of us agreed with. Other things that I think some folks in the chamber laughed a little bit when he stated that the last two budget addresses were balanced. Everyone knows that's not the case, but that's fine. But the key thing now is we need to look at the numbers. So I haven't seen a report yet that illustrates where his numbers are. I'm not sure if he thinks that we need to rely on what the Senate is working on. It's very unclear to me at this point. When I get back to my office as appropriations chair, I hope to see some kind of report that shows me the pluses and minuses and see if in his third attempt he was able to at least present a balanced budget.
A lot of people in the Capitol here would say that this standoff is really the result of two men with huge egos, the House Speaker and the governor, and neither one wants to give in to the other. But you, as you say, as the appropriation chair, are very familiar with the budget numbers. And when you talk to your colleagues in either the House or the Senate, do you see just among your comrades that there's a way to reach a budget accord? If so, how can we get this out of this tug of war that we're going?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think in the last year and a half or so, we've been able to pass 6 to 7 budgets. Granted, they're stopgap measures, they're small budgets, but they have one thing in common, and that is we've had rank and file from both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, led by the governor's office. And when you bring all caucuses together, we can get it done. Rank and file gets it. Once it leaves our hands, it's a whole different thing. Now, I'll make this comment in terms of the Senate's approach. We can't wait to see what they come up with. I think on the House side, we'll take a good look. It's a moving target, so it's hard to tell you what I think about it right now. The only difference, though, is that's coming, yes, from the Senate. It's contrary to what we've done in the past. We have all 4 caucuses in the governor's office working together. Hopefully, it will lead us to something. But that's been my observation so far, is that we need to work together. You just can't do it piecemeal.
One of the things the governor pointed out in his address was that the state workers have Cadillac health care, but they're paying like a bronze plan, and that's unfair to the taxpayers. In your estimation, is that a talking point, or is there something that actually should be looked at?
Well, I think there's no doubt that we should look at the general population and see what they're getting, but I don't want to use that as the way to measure what the insurance are. I mean, if they're not that great, I don't want to just have our folks have a poor insurance plan.
I think just for the viewers, he was saying if the workers paid more, the state might save $500 million a year. Without addressing that specific idea, have you and other members of your caucus been able to identify any areas where there could be some reductions in spending without doing any great damage to them?
I think he mentioned something today, say we should put a hard cap on all the state agencies. I agree with that. When it comes to workman's comp, I think we can have a conversation. I think that is perhaps the biggest issue in terms of what manufacturing companies and businesses talk about. At least that's been my experience. He mentioned today that all these companies get very excited with term limits. I haven't heard that, but when it comes to workman's comp, I think I've heard enough. I think we should sit down and tweak it. We did this 3 or 4 years ago in a bipartisan fashion, and we've seen some benefits to it. Not enough, but we can see that if we work on that, it will definitely make a difference. And so that's one thing I think we can work on. Some of his numbers that you talked about, some of the savings that he's talked about in the past, including this turnaround agenda. I've asked his administration, I know many others in our side, to show us the numbers. And we haven't seen anything yet. It's very anecdotal at this point. We heard something, I believe, through Capital Facts that giving them the benefit of the doubt, that the most they can achieve in savings would be like $500 million. That's a substantial amount, don't get me wrong. But again, we're looking at an $11 billion deficit right now. That does not close the gap.
Well, we should say about $11 billion in unpaid bill backlog, right, that the comptroller says by the end of the fiscal year, June 30, will be $15 billion. And so, as you and I were just talking off camera, even if we came up with a balanced budget, which the governor would say we haven't had in 15 years, we almost need to have a surplus budget to get caught up on that bill backlog, don't we?
We were talking about the $11 billion in deficit has probably in a couple of months from now. On top of that, no one's talking about the $130 billion in pension liability. On top of that, I was part of the Education Fund and Reform Commission, and we put out a report a couple of weeks ago. And the report clearly states that to adequately fund education, elementary and secondary education in the state, we need anywhere from $3.5 to $6 billion. I repeat,
in
additional expenditure, $3.5 to $6 billion, and that does not even factor in the rate of inflation. So when you add all those three components, it's going to take a while. What I would like to see from the governor's office and all caucuses is we need to start talking about a 4 or 5 year budget plan. We will not get out of this mess in 1 year. Some folks would say that we're required by the Constitution to present a balanced budget yearly. We haven't done that, especially the last 2 years. No one has gone to jail. So I think we need to come up with a 4 or 5 year plan. I think if people were to see that there's a plan in place that might work, that we can tweak along the way, they might be more tolerant. The problem that we're having right now, people are getting hurt. People don't know where we're heading to, and there's a lot of frustration. I feel the same frustration as well.
Well, I tell you what, this is a complicated issue. I'd love to talk longer. Maybe we can do a sit-down interview sometime and explore it in more detail. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Comptroller Susana Mendoza, thanks for joining us. And you just heard the governor's first budget as in your new position as comptroller. What is your reaction?
Well, it's same old. We're now 0 for 3. We're going into what is now officially a third year without a balanced budget proposal from this governor, which is a complete and utter abdication of his responsibility under the Constitution of the state of Illinois. I was hoping that today I would be pleasantly surprised and could actually cheerlead the fact that we might have a balanced budget proposal that would be step one in what will hopefully eventually be a budget. But, it's just unbelievable to me that the governor has failed now for a third year in a row to do his job per the Constitution.
I believe your numbers on your website show that right now we are approaching $11 billion in unpaid bills, and if I'm correct, we're going to have about $15 billion in unpaid bills by the end of the fiscal year, June 30. Is that right?
It likely is going to be worse than that. Today we're about 11.3 billion. And we've seen estimates between 16 and 17 billion by the end of the fiscal year. So this is a terrible, terrible situation. Now that 11.3 billion today, if a budget were passed miraculously today, the state of Illinois taxpayer would be on the hook for $700 million just in late payment interest penalties, right? This is a story you're not hearing about. The governor is married to his pet projects, yet can't tell the legislature how much money that would even make or save for Illinois taxpayers. But I can tell you as controller that being married to these pet projects is costing you, the taxpayer, minimum of $700 million today in just late payment interest penalties. That's money we're burning. It's taxpayer dollars that will never be spent on higher ed, on early childhood education, on social services, on job creation programs. Really, this is what the cost of a budget impasse is. And not only are we in the red in ink, we're in the red in blood, because people are dying in the state as a result of not getting the services that they need, given this war of the ego fights.
You brought up the interest, right? Years ago, the legislature said we will pay 12% on unpaid bills, which at the time they did that, my thinking is that they did that as that's going to be so onerous, we will make sure that we pay. But has any thought been given in this record low interest rate environment to say, let's bring that down to 5% or so, pick a number, but because the people that are paying that interest aren't the people who aren't getting the job done, it's the taxpayers, so we're just piling more and more debt. Has there been any thought about that, like, hey, why don't we cut the interest rate on the backlog?
Yeah, our office is actually putting together some really great ideas when it comes to restructuring or not being on the hook for paying loan shark rates. This is what's happening. Taxpayers are the ones floating this. So can you imagine telling the taxpayer that if we're 90 days late, which is what it is, the clock starts ticking when I get a bill, and anything after 90 days we're paying 12% rates on. It's unconscionable. It is literally like payday lending happening here at the state level, and there's lots of politically connected people that are making a lot of money off of the taxpayers being late.
You'll say with the bill going to the taxpayer.
Yeah, it's unconscionable. This budget needs to pass now. We need a balanced budget now so that we can stop the bleeding of taxpayer dollars, and we can actually provide services, and in many cases life-saving services, to people who rely on the government for help. And I'm not talking about people asking for handouts, but people who are asking for helping hand, our most infirm children and seniors, people who deserve to have a safety net of government, and also then be able to spur economic development, create an economic culture here that's stable, where businesses can plan for a payroll and meeting the payroll, can plan for job creation and job growth. That doesn't happen with an economic instability that is currently the fact here in Illinois. Businesses aren't leaving here because there's no term limits. They're leaving Illinois because we don't have any economic stability. And that's what happens when you go into a third year now without a budget proposal from this governor.
All right, Comptroller, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Pam Altoff, thanks for joining us. As you've heard the governor's budget address, what is your reaction?
Well, as I've stated to several people, I was really pleased to see the focus in on job creation and growing the economy. You know, out in my area, property taxes are brutal. They're just escalating every year, and people are having difficulty grappling with the entire aspect and prospect. In fact, in many instances, my constituents face a property tax bill that is higher than their mortgage payment. So it was wonderful to hear the governor talk about the fact that part of his plan, part of his proposal was to grow the economy, focusing in on job creation and not just talking about raising taxes. So that was very positive. In addition, I was extraordinarily pleased to hear the shout out again to the Senate for all the work that we've been doing on trying to craft at least the foundation and a framework for a balanced budget.
It's been said in the Senate, there you have the compromise called the grand bargain between Senator Radonio, the Republican leader, at least the supporting, and Senate Democratic leader Cullerton. And they have said there's something in there for everyone to hate and for everyone to like. What are your thoughts on the so-called grand bargain?
Yes, that is absolutely true, but I would tell people that it still is fluid. For the first time we heard the governor indicate that he would never consider any new revenue taxing retirement income, nor would he consider going back to 2003 and raising the taxes on food and drug. So that gives us, again, a little bit more direction in crafting something. I think you're going to see a huge amount of effort today, tomorrow, Friday, in trying to actually get something done, concrete, and hopefully to the floor for action.
In the Senate?
In the Senate, yes, sir.
Have you had any conversations or have you been told anything about whether this has any support in the House?
No, actually, I think we're focusing in on trying to get something in the Senate. It was very clear that Leader Radonio and President Cullerton did step out. They're showing great leadership and courage in trying to formulate something. And I think we're really worried right now and just working with our Senate colleagues who have expressed an interest in addressing the issue. I mean, people have to understand it's $11 million a day cost to the taxpayers of Illinois every day that we don't have a budget. We are spending more money than is coming in via court orders, consent decrees, as well as continuing appropriations. This is brutal. And if it continues, if we don't get a balanced budget by the end of this fiscal year, we're talking in excess of $20 billion. If you think the proposals that the Senate is considering today with regard to reforms, revenues, is bad now, I can't even imagine what it's going to look like if we don't come up with something before June 30th, 2017.
Well, and just, we tend to think, at least here in this building, of, the budget being passed at the end of May, but right now we don't have any spending authority for most of state spending. So I don't know how long we can last before, we knock Humpty Dumpty off the wall.
That's correct. The pressures are mounting every single day. We've just had Attorney General Madigan's recent actions with regard to not paying state employees. Fortunately, we did appropriate enough money for education for one full year, but even that, students will be going back to school in August. We need to work on this, get something, send it over to the House, send it to the governor and say, okay, give us your input, but let's work on this and let's get this done. It is the number one responsibility of the governor and the General Assembly to pass a budget.
Do you think that the grand bargain, as it is, there might be changes, but do you think it can get out of the Senate? And to what extent are senators of either side willing to take what can be a tough vote when they don't even know if it'll be brought up in the House?
Well, for the first time in many years, that is the question, is do we have the moral fiber and the courage to do something? But again, as I stated earlier, the true danger is in doing nothing and letting this, growing debt get larger and larger, so when finally something occurs, it's not devastating to all. As you stated from the very beginning, I'll do the full circle. There's something in this grand bargain that people like and something that they hate. And we're not all on that same page. Things that I like, I am certain my Democrat colleagues hate. But at least it's a better balance. And so I'm actually very encouraged that hopefully we'll get something done by the end of the month.
All right, well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Bob Diver, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. As we tape this about, 2 days ago, you announced that you were a candidate for governor in 2018 on the Democratic for the Democratic nomination. Why are you running for governor? What is it that you think that you can achieve that is not happening currently?
Well, I believe that Illinois needs a great deal of stability brought to its economic condition, and I think that comes with a well laid out plan on how we're going to manage the state and how we're going to have a budget that is supportive to its citizens and to the services that we issue in the state. We have to find out how we're going to pay out the backlog of bills that we have. Today, I had a meeting with an investment company to discuss those $10.5 billion worth of bills and how we could better pay those off, because people need to realize that there's interest on that debt that's occurring every month, and the interest alone is costing taxpayers a lot of money.
About 12%.
That's right. And so is there a better way to handle that debt, which I think there is, and it would be a great thing if in a year we could pay those bills off and be debt-free.
Taking a loan, that would be at a much lower interest rate.
That's correct, through bonds. And that's a program that I'm looking at. Also, I am an educator, and education's always one of the leading issues, always in Illinois, on an education budget. And there's a great deal of discussion about how we should adequately fund education. I have a working knowledge of that funding formula. I have ideas on how we could achieve full funding for our schools, fair and equitable, and make our schools more efficient, and improve test scores, which I think we need to consistently do. I have a little bit different viewpoint on public education. I'm more concerned about graduation rates than I am college entrance rates.
I know there's a lot of issues we just could discuss and would look forward to, and maybe we can get together with you, but we appreciate you sharing your ideas with us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Greg Bays, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel. What is your reaction to the governor's budget address?
It's positive. I think the governor laid out some objectives, told the members of the General Assembly he's willing to look with great seriousness at what's been going over on the Senate side. A lot of work's been done over there in the last month and a half on education, on spending, on budget cuts, on business-related reforms, all of that. So I think the message here today was we're serious about seeing if the, quote, grand bargain can move forward, and I think that was his message. My concern is that there was some heckling on the other side that's not going to help this process, but that's politics, and maybe we'll get by that after a day or two.
We have had actually some criticism even on the House Republican side of the so-called grand bargain in the Senate, and even Senator Radogno and Senator Cullerton will both say that there are things in there that everyone can hate and everyone can maybe applaud. They may be different things. As you look through the grand bargain, how would your membership, you think, respond to it?
Well, first and foremost, we'd be pleased with not only what the governor said, but what we've been told that's there are putting permanent some of the important tax reforms that we've called for, manufacturer's purchase credit, research and development that the governor talked about. We've had a lot of discussion about workers' comp changes and are down the road on some of those. So that's positive. I guess I would give this question to those who have problems with what's there. If not that plan, what plan? Now, some have offered some plans around here, but they're not realistic. They're not realistic in being able to pass, and they're not really realistic in the kind of savings that would be realized. We have got a problem here in trying to balance the budget of the state of Illinois. The rating agencies have sent a very serious message to the leadership in saying your bond rating is near the very bottom it can be. You have got to get this changed. It's a drag not only on the Illinois economy but the entire Midwest. So as we have stated, the canaries in the coal mine are dying every day in this state, and we've got to make a course correction.
The governor's mentioned, as you have as well, how many more jobs we would have if we had just grown with the national economy. What's the sentiment of the manufacturers across the state as far as staying in, and how much longer do you think they are going to hang in here to see if something gets done?
Any kind of company that is thinking about an expansion or the potential of needing a new location for its facility. Manufacturers are always changing, needing to have new technologies or whatever. Have to examine that question. Some are just required and need to be here because of the location, access to the markets and things, but many of them are not. A story, Terry, I heard just last week in Southern Illinois where a manufacturer said he received in the mail from the governor of Texas a check for $1 million made out to the owner of that company. He says all you've got to do is move your company with 100 employees and stay for 2 years in the state, and you can cash that check. It's the kind of aggressive nature that other states are using to try to attract our manufacturers. Right now, we're not even in the ballgame of that discussion because of what they see going on in the business of running the state of Illinois, and that's why it's so absolutely critical we get this changed.
And as we stand here, I don't know how much longer without a spending authority some of these entities, different colleges and social service providers can hang in there. What is your thought? To what extent, when you talk to lawmakers, are you imparting that the sense of urgency that something has to happen?
The urgency, I think, has been there. It's really been the will, I think, to really move forward and understand that these are some very difficult decisions. Politicians never like to raise taxes. They never like to make the kind of decisions that may well be politically very unpopular or even career-ending. But I think that the members of the General Assembly, especially in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats both, realize that we have got to make a change, and the change needs to be made, not waiting to May 31st, as you and I have seen a lot of years around here. Everybody sort of waits to the last minute. I think they understand this needs to be done now. If you're going to make a change in tax policy, it needs to be done now, because you can't be reaching too far back into the same year, and if you change tax rates, that's another reason to get this done relatively soon.
Let me ask you one last question. We'll jump away from Illinois. We have a new president. He's talking about cutting regulations, cutting taxes. What is your response, and what do you hear from your members in the manufacturing realm?
Well, there's this excitement in the business community in general, manufacturing specifically, that the president does and did campaign on the notion that manufacturing is a backbone of our nation's economy, that we've lost too many manufacturing jobs to either overseas or just gone because of an inability to compete. And so I think there is an excitement on their part to see a movement forward. Now, we're only a month into the president's tenure, and I think we've got some time to go. I'd like to see him focused on tax reform. I mean, the idea of reappropriating the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that are overseas because of tax policies here in the U.S., if that was changed, then you could bring those dollars back. Just think about the reinvestment in factories. Think about the ability for our infrastructure in this country. We have the riches to be able to do that. It's just a matter of directing them in the right way. And I think it's one of the reasons the Trump message resonated, and resonated in most of the Midwest, as I smile about being in Illinois, but it did resonate in Wisconsin and Ohio and Michigan. And so I think that overall there's a positive. Now, there are some concerns with this president, some of his trade feelings and things of that nature, how it might impact a state like ours, agriculture, manufacturing, exports. But those are all good issues to work out and to be arguing about to try to move forward.
Right, Greg Bays, thank you. Senator Jim Claiborne, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. As you heard the governor's budget address, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm a little disappointed with the fact that I don't think there is a written document. And if there is a written document, we should begin dealing with that. In fact, the governor has a proposed plan. Let's call his plan for a vote. But I don't think there is a bill number that exists in the House or in the Senate that requires him statutorily by the Constitution to submit a balanced budget to us.
Is it a fair criticism that some have leveled that the governor has been basically saying to the legislature, at least I'm not saying this, but others were saying this, that he's asking the legislature to put together a budget instead of him putting together a balanced budget?
I think that's absolutely correct, and that's the point that I'm making. The Constitution, not the legislature, requires the governor to submit a balanced budget as of today. And to my knowledge, that has not happened. Unfortunately, the governor shouldn't be a Monday morning quarterback to sit back and see what the legislature does. He is the leader in this state. He's the executive director. He runs the executive branch, and he's required by Constitution to submit a balanced budget. Unfortunately, he didn't address the issue that there's no stability in this state because of the fact that we have not had a budget under his leadership. We are penalized it's costing us $11 million a day not to have a budget. Our vendors who we owe money to statutorily are entitled to 9% on the outstanding amount.
Actually, I thought it was even 12%, is it not?
Well, I was told 9. So
Either way, it's too high.
Either way, it's too high. I mean, if you think about it, they can get better rates by being owed by the state government than they can in the market.
What was there anything in the governor's address that you thought was a good idea that you could support?
Well, obviously, I do support the concept of creating bipartisanship. But you can't create bipartisanship if you call in Republican legislators to say if you vote for that, or the governor's point person who runs his campaign fund, Profit, threatens to take people off the battlefield. How do you create a atmosphere of cooperation and collaboration when you have $50 million out there that you're going to use against people who elected officials who don't totally agree with you?
And what of the effort in the Senate that I would say was born of total frustration, but where you have the Republican leader, Senator Radonio, coming together with the Senate President, Cullerton, and on the so-called grand bargain, where both of them have things in there that they don't like, and both of them have things in there that they do like. What are your thoughts on that going forward? Will senators take what could be a hard vote when they don't even know if that'll come up in the House?
Well, I think that we have to do the right thing. At the end of the day, to sit back and not have a budget is just not acceptable anymore. And I commend Senate President as well as Leader Radonio for coming together and saying we have to do something, we're leaders, we have to take the lead, and we have to move this agenda forward. So I'm not concerned about the House. I believe that if both sides, Republican and Democrats, can sit down and come up with a package and nobody totally likes it, then it's probably the best for the state of Illinois.
And lastly, we hear about different things, the impact on the people and districts. What are you hearing from your district? What kind of pain and suffering is being caused by the fact that there hasn't been a budget put together?
Well, I mean, when you talk about the most vulnerable in our society, our seniors who used to receive meals, they're not receiving meals. But I was told that for the most part, it allowed them to have access to people from the outside. So there were instances where people had fallen, and because someone was delivering the meals, they became aware of it, and they were able to save lives. Women or single parents who depend on daycare, who now just don't have that option anymore, then obviously it affects their livelihood and how they provide for their children. When you talk about the developmentally disabled not having a place to go, whether their parents are union workers or just hardworking people, that to have the ability to make sure your loved one receives quality care, that's taken care of in an environment where you otherwise can't provide those services, obviously jeopardize jobs, requires people to think about whether they should stay here. And I think those decisions on making sure our most vulnerable are provided services is a mandate that we should make sure that we are providing the resources so that the agencies or groups can provide those services.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.